Centuries have passed, but our order has remained steadfast in its sacred mission to preserve the balance between man and half-breed. Such was the quest of our founder, King Arthur.
Hi, I'm Rob Cram, and today we're taking a look at Ready at Dawn's action third-person shooter, The Order 1886, which launched a few months ago exclusively on the PlayStation 4. For the record, we passed on the game during its launch and heard a number of mixed opinions about the experience, and yet couldn't ignore the opportunity to jump into the dark and mysterious fantasy world when the price was more in line with its namesake, or shall we say under 20 quid. So this review has the added perspective of experiencing the game far less than the original pricing, so bear that in mind please. In a nutshell, players assume the role of smooth operator and protector of the people, Sir Galahad, who, as the name implies, is a member of the not-so-secretive order of modern-day knights, who alongside the usual police force are up against a group of up-to-no-good rebels. The backdrop is a brooding Victorian London, with all its smells and depravities, except we get to dig deeper and uncover the mysteries of the murderer Jack the Ripper, as you know runs rampant around the Whitechapel area. Things escalate into plentiful rounds of shooting, some misplaced loyalties before culminating into a predictable and foundations for a sequel ending. We won't spoil the intricacies here, other than focus on how the game presents itself to its audience. The opening moments being in dark and moody surrounds as a prelude to events set before they happen. Galahad is a prisoner and makes his escape, where the rest of the game fills in the blanks as to why. There's a heavy focus on cinematic presentation in this opening section, to the point where the clock is ticking into double figures before any gameplay begins proper. Rather than have players sit through Metal Gear style lengthy cutscenes twiddling their thumbs, players are asked to interact by way of quick time events, to make sure you're paying attention. These aren't for everyone, but at least they're reasonably well implemented here. Once the opening pleasantries are over, players are given the full rein to dive into the game's core mechanics of cover-based shooting against fairly competent AI who come at you in a number of forms, using cover where appropriate and standing close to explosive barrels for cinematic effect. The combat is pretty satisfying, with a reasonable selection of guns to mess around with. Cleverly, the game fuses real-world arms with more fantastical devices that don't feel too disjointed from the Victorian setting much. It works well overall and can't really be faulted other than its cover shooting 101. It's hard not to gel with the shooting because between each action moment there's a lot of directed scenes of moving through the linear levels with little else happening. It's a chance to experience some dialogue or take in the sights, interact with some collectible items and generally marvel at how seamless the game shifts from glorious cutscene to offering control. Later in the story, a bit of stealth is thrown in, which makes a welcome change, as eventually the shooting does become somewhat repetitive, although frequently this is fused with some tossed-in quick-time event moments. To be critical, there are plenty of scenes where some more direct control would have fared better, especially against the less human adversaries, as these, whilst great for their cinematic direction, feel a bit tacked on after experiencing them already. It's also a shame that the supernatural presence is greatly underused, where for the most part you're fighting against human opponents despite the Van Helsing style demeanour the game exudes. Visually, The Order is a work of art and could be argued is one of the best looking games on the system. There's an impressive attention to detail for most of the game, with its Victorian London setting fantastically realised. Character model detail is impressive, as is Galahad's facial hair and hard stare, and there's a distinct moodiness that resides throughout the experience. The additional post-release camera mode allows for tweaking of the visuals to a great degree, which is not only excellent for taking unique snapshots, but maintaining and playing with the lighting or effects during play. It's pretty neat freezing the action and zooming into elements you wouldn't normally see up close, such as the innards of an enemy after being hit with an electro weapon. If there's any complaint levelled at the visuals, and it has to be the lack of variety with some of the enemies and even key secondary characters. The same faces appear far too frequently in different roles, taking one out of the experience, which is a shame considering the cinematic quality the game hinges on. The voice acting is top quality though, with some excellent performances all round, which is complemented by a dramatic score that drives home the drama during the right moments. Like the visuals, there's a lot of effort placed here, making for a well-produced audio spectrum that hasn't cut corners in this department. Playing in one or more sittings, and it's possible to reach the final moments after several hours play, but not likely moving into double figures unless you replay again to hunt down all the collectible items for those all-important trophies. Other than perhaps showcasing the game to friends to highlight how cinematic games can be, or messing with the camera mode, there's little incentive to jump in again, despite there being 3 levels of difficulty to choose. The hardest won't even pose much of a challenge for core gamers, which is a shame, as a more hardcore mode would have given the game some additional legs for a repeat play. As it stands, the first run through is excellent and probably enough for most people, although the trophies suggest only 40% of players online have actually beaten the game. Order 1886 is a charming and likeable game which basks in its cinematic flavour and can be likened to how games such as Dragon's Lair in the early 90s felt, allowing gamers a chance to play an actual cartoon. Replace cartoon with interactive cutscene and you get the point. The Order has some interesting characters, an excellent premise and some polished execution despite the story being a little at odds with itself at times and NPC faces being reused far too often. There's some competent shooting action to be had here, but if you've an itchy trigger finger and would rather play than watch or walk, then some sections are likely to be a big turn-off. If tackled with an open mind and you're comfortable being entertained whilst doing very little, then the Order 1886 is a great experience to watch and play. At its higher price point, the lack of replay value hurts aplenty and perhaps could only be genuinely recommended as a rental, unless you've got money to burn. But with a price hovering around £20, then it's a no-brainer and well worth picking up. The additional camera mode is fun to play with and the story compelling enough to see it through to its conclusion. Aside from the price, as a game, it's enjoyable and fun despite the lack of traditional input from the player. It's still visually impressive and holds its own during the combative scenes, once the game moves into gear. The Order 1886 scores 8 out of 10. I'm Rob Cram, thanks for watching.
Izzy, we have a problem. Damn it. Yes, it's me, Izzy.
I lost